Unmasked tanked in the States, and we spent most of 1980 inactive. We didn't have a drummer anyway. The single Shandy was a hit abroad, however, and we booked a tour of Europe and Australia for the fall. But before we could play live, we needed a drummer. Auditioning people was very strange. We didn't want big-name drummers. We wanted somebody to come out of nowhere. It wouldn't have made sense to have Anton Fig or some other known commodity dress up as a black and silver giraffe or whatever. Bill placed a cryptic ad in some music magazines, and we also spread the word. Bill started to get tapes and photos and bios and lots of phone calls. He went through the materials, and we periodically invited groups of potential replacements he had filtered to audition with us. We decided we didn't want a drummer who played like Peter. The ones who made the best impression on us played what you might call English. They played on the backbeat, and whether they were playing double bass drums or not, they revered the same bands we did. Peter had enough trouble keeping time on a single bass drum and snare, so the idea of him playing two bass drums was out of the question. It wouldn't have made sense in the context of what we were doing anyway. Using a double bass drum in rock came about as a way to emulate what John Bonham of Led Zeppelin managed to do with one bass drum. His foot was so fast that it took most drummers two kick drums and both feet to mimic it. We didn't set out to find someone with a double kit, but we also didn't want to impose boundaries or limitations on a new member. As long as we were getting somebody new, we figured we should be willing to move forward. One guy who auditioned was a little stove repairman from Brooklyn named Paul Caravello. He was tiny with a huge head of hair and no airs or attitude. The first thing he did was ask us for our autographs. At first, I wasn't blown away by his playing, but everyone else in the room, including Vinnie Ponce and Bill Aucoin, thought he was great. We brought the guy back for a second time, and he turned out to have a good voice with the same raspy quality Peter had. He was also a quick learner. We had found our guy. Paul wanted to change his name, and we wanted him to change it too. We didn't need three Pauls in the band since Ace also shared that name. His first suggestion was Rusty Blades, which we vetoed quickly. Thankfully, the name game was short-lived when his second suggestion was Eric Carr, a name that sidestepped any obvious cartoon rock star moniker. He seemed like a good soul. Some of the other people who auditioned had acted like rock stars, thinking they would gain points for that. Eric was sweet. He eventually proved to be tortured in his own way, but he certainly was a much-needed breath of fresh air in the wake of Peter's departure. He had told us stories about repairing stoves, going to an apartment and opening up stoves to find all kinds of bugs and beasts crawling around inside. And we wanted him to know he wouldn't be a second-class citizen and KISS. So once we told him he was in the band, we did two things to welcome him. First, we bought him a silver Porsche 924. I somehow became the guy who was supposed to watch over him and groom him, teach him. He approached me after he got the car. "Can I have it painted camouflage?" "Absolutely not," I said. I didn't think he should take a sleek imported sports car and turn it into a circus mobile. Then I took him shopping at a place called the French Jeans Store. They sold, surprise, French jeans. I helped him pick out a new wardrobe. He'd need it since we were leaving for a European tour soon. It took some time to figure out a character for Eric. Heaven forbid we put him in a character people already knew. That seemed too obvious to us, and maybe sacrilegious. Originally he was going to be the Hawk. We had a costume built with a protruding chest and feathers all over it. He painted a beak on his nose, but he looked like the mascot for a high school football team. All that was missing were the big foam chicken feet. It was horrible. Fortunately, he came up with the idea of the fox. He wore the same size boots as Peter, so we used existing boots and had the platforms built up even more. The boots ended up being like stilts, and he still looked tiny next to us. Eric got thrown in at the deep end of the pool. We had become comfortable dealing with the world we operated in. Basic stuff, like handling women's sexual advances and the media, or acting properly in a restaurant. Eric had to learn on the fly. The first night we were in Paris, Eric wore a brand new white suit to dinner, his first. Not 10 minutes into the night, he spilled a huge glass of red wine all over it. What a schmuck. He sent that suit to the cleaner so many times, hoping against hope the stain would come out, that when it finally came back white, the sleeves fell off when he put the jacket on. Another night he really liked the food we'd had, which had come on a sizzling hot plate. "Please, sir, may I have some more?" The waiter brought another searing hot plate, carrying it with tongs, and Eric reached up and grabbed it with his bare hands. You could hear the tss sound as it singed his fingers. What a schmuck. Another night in France, a guy at a nightclub started hitting on Eric, making him uncomfortable. He went over to Ace and said, "That guy over there is trying to come on to me." Ace, in his inimitable logic, said, "Let's make out so he thinks we're together. Then he'll leave you alone." And the kissing began. Armed military personnel guarded the airports in some parts of Europe back then. One time, at an airport where security had AK-47s, Eric got pulled aside. He was wearing a camouflage jumpsuit and bullet belts. They took him through a door and out of our sight, but he was back surprisingly quickly. He seemed like a kid. His life experience had been limited, and he was naive and gullible. One night in England, he took a female journalist to his room from the hotel bar where we were all hanging out. The next day, we asked him what happened. "Well, we talked, and then she wanted to take some pictures of me without my clothes on," he said. Sure enough, when the next week's issue of the Journalist magazine came out, there was Eric looking like an idiot, naked in the bathtub with his huge head of hair and a glass of champagne. What a schmuck. Every single night, the promoters threw parties which were packed with models and actresses. Some parties were women only. We would show up at a club or ballroom that had been taken over, and the place would be filled with beautiful women. Australia was one giant chicken coop. Eric, however, would often leave the parties and go out and befriend some waif he met on the street. He identified with the fans. Maybe he felt more like them than like one of us at that point. He sometimes brought girls to his room who had been camping outside trying to catch a glimpse of the band. For his comfort, he chose women like that over models and penthouse pets. Issues shape personalities. The first hints of Eric's trouble started to come out, too. One day, he rented a car and driver to spend a day in the countryside with a girl he'd met. He was so nervous, he told us, that he got awful gas and had to stop the car every 10 minutes to go to the bathroom. He was depressed afterwards about what an idiot he felt like. He also went on about how he was losing his hair. His hair was so big that when he moved forward, it moved backwards. It was always moving in the opposite direction from the rest of him. And yet he constantly wanted me to look at his head. "Look, is it thinning here?" And strangest of all, Eric struggled with the idea that he wasn't the original drummer of the band. I didn't understand it. I mean, of course he wasn't the original drummer. He was the second drummer. So what? There was no talking him out of his funk when he started obsessing over the fact that he would never be the first drummer. Back home, the band had more time off. Even though we hadn't toured in the States for a full year, we figured we'd make another record first. We decided to work with Bob Ezrin again, the producer who had served as our captain in Svengali for Destroyer. "Let's put out an album that makes a statement," he told us. "One that shows everybody how talented you are. Trying to show people how talented and bright you are is the best way to make an idiot of yourself, and we ended up doing that with flying colors." Gene, Eric, and I moved to Toronto in March 1981 to work on the album. Bob wanted to do it on his home turf. We didn't know at first, but his drug habit was now dictating his choice of location. I had always been aware that Bob had a drug problem, but he had managed it in the past. Now his 24/7 cocaine use had taken on epic proportions. The captain abandoned ship. He was supposed to serve as the visionary behind the concept, and all we were getting were notes sent to the studio by messenger after Bob listened to cassettes we sent to his home. Eventually, we got so far behind in the production that Gene and I started working simultaneously in 2 separate studios, both of us sending tapes to Bob and getting back notes, doing the whole thing piecemeal. We had virtually no idea what the other guy was doing, and we couldn't reach Bob on the phone. His wife relayed messages because Bob was too fucked up to get to the phone. Poor Eric, this wonderful guy who thought he had joined a hard rock band, was suddenly playing gibberish with a fox costume in his closet. He was completely thrown by this band that had lost its way and was stumbling along a ridiculous path. He wasn't comfortable making explicit objections at that point, but he did express bewilderment and discomfort. "You know, this isn't what I was expecting," he said. But he was never in a position to draw a line in the sand. I don't know whether the tour situation or the overall band crisis affected Gene. He wasn't fully vested in the band at that point. After all, he had brought in a carload of kiddies to sing on the album and was clearly looking elsewhere. He's never been one to verbalize his feelings, so it wasn't something we talked about, even though we were both certainly aware of what was happening. Eric, for his part, didn't understand the financial side. He wasn't aware of how the disastrous turnouts related to our budgeting. He just loved being in the band and loved playing the material from the new album. Since MTV had covered our unmasking, we figured that this time around they would probably play a music video if we made one. We weren't going to get a world premiere slot or anything, but we were hopeful it would get played. The video for Lick It Up was a bigger production than I Love It Loud, but we managed to keep the costs fairly low. Some artists were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on videos at the time, and that seemed crazy to us, especially in light of MTV's track record of not playing us in the past. We wanted to make Lick It Up for a reasonable amount of money. The video opened with an image of skulls, and if you watch very closely, you'll see one of them wobble a little. They were made out of latex. We shot the video in a burned-out area of the Bronx. Aside from a few props like the skulls, that was all real. We didn't do anything but show up. It looked like Dresden in 1945, a post-apocalyptic wasteland. But it wasn't a stage set. I'd never seen anything like that before. I hadn't spent much time in the South Bronx. The crazy thing was that it wasn't just one small area. It was huge, like an entire bombed-out city or a massive movie set, broken down and decaying buildings as far as you could see, piles of bricks and rocks and garbage everywhere. It was the weirdest, most surreal thing I'd ever seen. When I saw the complete edited video, I thought it was cool. It was an MTV video. It had girls, it had fire, it had weird hairdos. It had all the things MTV videos had. Eric hated it because he had these little drumstick legs, so he's walking and you see these little feet with high-pointed shoes and these thick legs. And people seeing Vinny asked, "Is that a girl?" Back in the States, all was not well inside KISS. Eric had stopped talking to me during the Crazy Nights tour. He sometimes got into ruts and shut down. He seemed mad at me about something, so finally, after months, I had to sit him down and read him the riot act. You just can't pull this kind of shit for this amount of time. It might have sounded dictatorial, but the fact was he was there to play drums and be a member of the team. The silence and tension had become unbearable. This non-communicative bullshit stops today, I told him. And it did. It seemed he needed help to force his way out of a self-imposed prison. Things with Eric were definitely getting increasingly weird. But they had always tended to be odd. Whenever we were both in L.A., I would invite him to come over and hang out with me. "Is anyone else there?" he would ask. If I had people over, I told him, "Eric, they're nice people, we're hanging out, come on over, it'll be fun." But if anyone else was there, he refused to come. On the Crazy Nights tour, he had started to obsess over not being the original drummer again. The whole thing was so irrational. What could I say? It was true, he still wasn't the original drummer. He would never be the original drummer. For my solo tour, I had no illusions of playing arenas. I just wanted a little creative space and the chance to play with different musicians. So I booked a string of club gigs and put together a band. Bob Kulick was my guitar player of choice. Our studio work together over the years gave us some familiarity and gave me full confidence that he could pull it off. Bob brought in the bass player, Dennis St. James, and I turned to a keyboard player named Gary Corbett. He sang, which was important because I needed another voice for harmonies. As for drummers, two names came up as I searched. One was Greg Bissonette, who had played with David Lee Roth, and the other was Eric Singer. Eric seemed promising, so I asked him to come to a rehearsal studio and jam with the rest of the band members. It was hard for me to assess him because with drummers it's about more than just keeping the beat. They need to play in front of the beat, on it, or behind it in a way that's sympathetic to everyone else's playing, in this case, mine. But even in that first session, he sounded terrific. The band was assembled and off we went, playing dates on both coasts. I don't think Gene cared about my solo tour at all. If anything, my decision to go out on my own probably made him feel better about what he was doing and not doing. Eric Carr, on the other hand, was forlorn about my doing something outside of Kiss. He also seemed hurt that he couldn't play in my solo band, even after I had explained to him that the whole point for me was to do something different on my own. "You're the drummer in Kiss," I told him. "You can't be my backup drummer." One night we played a very crowded gig in Brooklyn at a famous club called L'Amour, and a guy ran up on stage and tried to hug me. All of a sudden there was a huge ball of hair on the stage. The stage invader had ripped out some of my hair extensions. Everybody had hair extensions back then, and when one of mine got pulled out, it looked like a dead rat on the stage. When the tour stopped in Manhattan for 2 gigs at the Ritz, Eric Carr came to one of the shows and sat in the balcony with his head resting on the railing through the entire show. Afterwards, he came backstage and out of left field turned to Eric Singer and said, "You're going to replace me." "What are you talking about?" I said. "He's going to replace me in Kiss," said Eric Carr, nodding at Eric Singer. "Listen, Eric, you're the drummer in Kiss, and he's the drummer in my solo band." Eric Carr was not a happy camper by the late 80s. He had started to drink more and may have been doing drugs as well, though I wasn't sure. People tended to conceal drug use from me since they knew I was adamantly opposed to it. I don't know whether Eric's increased drinking exacerbated whatever he was going through or whether the drinking was a result of his unhappiness, but he started to get erratic. By the time Kiss reconvened and began to tour our next album, Hot in the Shade, in late 1989, Eric Carr stopped talking to me entirely. Then one afternoon in early 1991, Eric Carr called me at home. He had just gotten home from the doctor's office. "What's wrong?" I said. "I spat up some blood, so I thought I'd go get checked out," said Eric. "Everything cool?" "I don't know," he said, "but I'm really worried. They gave me some kind of scan and found a finger-shaped growth going in and out of my heart." "Did they say anything?" "They said it could be cancer." Unfortunately, a few days later, he called me again. "It really is cancer," Eric told me. Not long afterwards, we were asked to record God Gave Rock and Roll to You for the movie Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, with Bob Ezrin producing, trying to capture some Destroyer-era magic and erase the memory of the elder. Eric desperately wanted to work on the song, but he was still very frail. "You have to pay attention to your health now," I told him, "whether that means recuperating on a tropical island or just resting and focusing on yourself." If I knew then what I know now, I never thought this might be his last chance to perform. I would have let him play, but at the time I was sure he would beat the odds. So Eric Singer played that session, though Eric Carr came to L.A. and sat behind the drums for the video shoot. He had lost all his hair from the cancer treatment and had to wear a massive wig to replicate his natural puffball. We told Eric Carr that we were going to record an album without him. We assured him we would pay all of his bills and keep his insurance going. At some point, we brought Eric Singer back. Whether you work in a band or at a factory or in any other kind of job, you have to work together with other people, and that connection affects the overall quality of the work as well as the atmosphere. As fate would have it, Eric Singer fit perfectly. He really was replacing Eric Carr in Kiss, at least for a few months in the recording studio. That fall of 1991, as we worked in L.A., I got a call from my friend Bob Held in New York. What he was trying to tell me was confusing. Eric Carr had suffered a stroke. The cancer had spread to his brain. He'd been found in his apartment after calling 911. When the emergency responders showed up, Eric was already unconscious, so they paged through his address book and randomly chose someone to call, which turned out to be Bob. But from that moment on, we couldn't get any information. His parents wouldn't talk to me. I called daily to no avail. I didn't understand why nobody would talk to me, or to Gene for that matter. A few weeks later, on November 24th, 1991, my assistant called me and said, "Eric is dead." I called Gene and told him the news. It was shocking, partly because we hadn't been able to get any information about his situation. Gene and I flew to New York for Eric's funeral. It was an open casket funeral, which was ghastly. The body in the casket, which was holding a set of drumsticks, didn't look like Eric. It didn't look like a human being. It looked like a mannequin. Eric's girlfriend, a Playboy playmate he'd been with for several years, briefly took the drumsticks out of the casket for some reason, and Eric's fingers moved as she did. The scent of flowers was overwhelming. You could barely breathe. But I could also smell hostility all around us, people bristling at our presence. Peter and Ace were there. Peter, who everyone knew resented and disliked Eric, tried to tell me that Eric had been calling him all the time. Nothing seemed to make sense. Eric's girlfriend was also filled with anger at me and Jean. It turned out that Eric had painted us as the bad guys. He said we'd booted him out of the band and didn't support him, which simply wasn't true. Everyone there seemed to have the impression that Eric had been cut off, but he hadn't been cut off. Once we told him we were going to record Revenge, he cut himself off from us. I didn't feel like the bad guy, and it was strange to be treated that way.